The first time Olivia saw the house, it looked more abandoned than lived in. She had been driving through a quiet back road in northern Maine, the kind of place where the trees grow so thick they feel like a wall pressing in on both sides. Her phone had lost service miles back, and the GPS had given up before that. It was late in the afternoon, with a pale sun fighting through heavy gray clouds, and she had pulled over to stretch her legs. The house sat at the end of a narrow gravel path, half hidden by overgrown weeds. Its wooden siding had faded to a sickly gray, the windows either dark or shuttered, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle like a tired old man. Yet, despite its condition, something about it seemed watchful, as if it knew she had stopped to look at it. She told herself it was just curiosity that made her walk closer. Maybe it had once been a boarding house or a family's summer retreat left to rot in the woods. She noted how silent everything was. No birds, no breeze, not even the hum of distant traffic. The quiet pressed into her ears until she could hear the faint crunch of her own shoes on the gravel. A shiver ran up her spine, though the air wasn't particularly cold. When she reached the front gate, a rusted iron arch nearly swallowed by vines, she stopped. The gate was open, hanging loosely on its hinges, and beyond it the path wound up to a porch that sagged under the weight of moss. She hadn't meant to come this far, but there she was, staring up at the house as if waiting for it to notice her that a sound came from inside. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable, a soft creak like footsteps on an old staircase. Olivia froze. It was impossible, she thought. No one could be living here. But the sound came again, a groan of wood under shifting weight. She peered through the shadowy windows, but saw nothing except the warped reflection of herself standing in the fading light. A logical voice in her head whispered, an animal, maybe, a raccoon or a fox. Yet her chest tightened, and she felt the prickle of being watched from behind the glass. She pulled her jacket tighter and glanced back at her car, half hidden by the curve of the road. Going back suddenly seemed very wise, but the strangest thing happened when she turned to leave. From the corner of her eye, she saw the front door move. Just slightly, enough that she knew it hadn't been the wind. The door had opened an inch, the darkness inside yawning wider. Her pulse skipped, and her throat went dry. She didn't move, didn't breathe, until the door eased back into place as though nothing had disturbed it at all. Olivia stood there, gripping the straps of her bag, trying to decide if she had imagined the entire thing. But when she glanced down at the gate again, her heart stuttered. The iron gate, which had been sagging open when she arrived, was now shut. She backed away slowly, refusing to turn her back on the house. Step by step, she made her way to her car, fumbling for her keys with trembling fingers. Her eyes never left the porch, the dark windows, the silent door. By the time she got behind the wheel and locked it, her breathing had quickened into short, sharp gasps. The house sat in the dimming light, unchanged, silent, as if mocking her fear. She told herself again and again that she had only imagined the movement, the sound, the gate. But when she finally drove off, gravel spitting from her tires, she couldn't shake the image of the house watching her retreat. And even stranger, she swore she saw the faint flicker of a light come on in an upstairs window as she rounded the bend and lost sight of it. Lena woke up to a dull thud against her apartment door. The clock on her nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. For a moment, she thought it was a dream, the kind where noises from outside bleed into half-consciousness. But there it was again, a faint rustle, then silence. Barefoot, she crept through the darkness, every board under her weight groaning like a warning. Through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The flickering fluorescent light above her unit cast sickly shadows on peeling wallpaper. When she opened the door cautiously, a small square of paper fluttered to the floor. Her heart stopped as she unfolded it. 3 words, written in rushed, uneven pen strokes. I see you. She slammed the door shut and locked every bolt, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Panic skittered across her nerves like static. Maybe it was a prank, she told herself. College kids in her building sometimes left pizza boxes in front of people's doors as jokes. But the handwriting, it wasn't playful or exaggerated. It was sharp, deliberate, and felt intimate in a way that chilled her blood. She shoved the note into her desk drawer and forced herself back to bed, but her body refused to relax. Every creak of the building became footsteps, Every gust of wind against the window sounded like whispered breath. The next morning, Lena brought up the incident to her neighbor, Mr. Ortega, a retired bus driver who lived across the hall. His normally jovial expression hardened when she showed him the note. "You should tell the landlord," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "This building's old, no cameras, no security. People think they can get away with things here." He offered to keep an eye on her door when she worked late, but his reassurance barely dented her growing dread. She left for her cafe shift earlier than usual, hyper-aware of every passing face on the street, searching for one that might match the hooded figure from the parking lot. That evening, the cafe was unusually busy, the chatter of customers a welcome distraction. But when she returned to her car, her stomach tightened. The same hooded man stood at the far end of the lot, this time not even pretending to be occupied. He didn't approach or speak, just watched her. Under the harsh light, she could make out a scruffy jawline and pale skin, but the hood still obscured most of his face. Lena locked her doors immediately and drove off, her hands trembling so hard the steering wheel rattled. Halfway home, she pulled over, forcing herself to breathe. It felt like a sick game, one where she didn't understand the rules yet. When she arrived at her building, her stomach dropped. Another note was taped to her door, this one more ominous. "You looked scared tonight." The edges of the paper fluttered in the drafty hallway as if mocking her. Rage briefly replaced fear. She ripped the note down, her fingers crumpling it violently. But the anger didn't last. The sense of being watched tightened around her chest like a noose. She double-locked her door and sat with her back against it, phone in hand, debating whether to call the police. But what would she tell them? A stranger had stood in a parking lot and left a couple of notes? She could almost hear the skepticism in their voices. Instead, she sat in the dark, listening for footsteps outside her door. 2 nights after the second note, Lena's nerves were stretched thin. She kept the television on for background noise, hoping the chatter would drown out every creak and groan of the old apartment. It was past midnight when she noticed the sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping against her living room window. At first, she dismissed it as the wind or the branches of the tree outside brushing the glass. But then the tapping stopped and started again, this time slower, deliberate. Her stomach lurched. She crept toward the window, careful not to make the floorboards squeal beneath her feet. The curtains fluttered slightly in a draft as she reached for them, her heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo in the quiet room. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the fabric. A small, irrational part of her hoped it was a prankster, maybe kids from the building. But when she finally yanked the curtain aside, her breath froze in her chest. Pressed against the glass was a pale face, eyes wide and unblinking, framed by the edge of a hood. The man didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared straight at her through the window, his expression unreadable, almost detached. Lena stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp that crashed loudly to the floor. The sound seemed to break whatever silent standoff they had. By the time she scrambled to the window again, the man was gone. Only the faint smear of condensation where his breath had fogged the glass remained. She locked the window, latched it twice, and shoved the heavy couch in front of it for good measure. Her hands shook so badly she could barely dial her phone. When Mr. Ortega answered, groggy and confused, she barely managed to get out. "He was at my window." He promised to come over with a baseball bat, but by the time he arrived, the street outside was empty. The next morning, Lena skipped her shift and called in sick. She spent hours pacing her small apartment, rehearsing what she'd say if she called the police. Would they even take her seriously? She imagined the report. "A man has been watching me, sometimes from the parking lot, sometimes outside my window." There were no cameras, no witnesses, just 2 ominous notes. By afternoon, her resolve hardened. She would file a report anyway. But before she could leave, a soft thump sounded against her door. Dread coiled in her stomach. Slowly, she bent down and found another note. "Your curtains don't hide you." The message was so personal, so invasive, that it made her skin crawl. It wasn't just that he was watching. It was that he wanted her to know he was. She felt her world shrink around her, her once familiar apartment, now a fragile box with paper-thin walls. For the first time, she felt truly unsafe in her own home. She pressed her back to the door, listening for footsteps in the hall. But there was nothing, only the hum of the building's old heating system and her own uneven breathing. She knew then that pretending it wasn't happening was no longer an option. Something had to change. The morning after the dream, Megan woke with the uneasy sensation that her room was smaller than it had been before, the walls just a fraction closer. Her porthole window, usually streaked with spray, was perfectly clean, so clean it reflected her face like a mirror. When she looked into it, for the briefest second, she thought she saw someone standing directly behind her. She spun around, but the cabin was empty. Her unease grew heavier by the hour. She couldn't shake the man's words from the previous day. "You're in my cabin." Determined to learn the truth, she sought out Helen in the library. The older woman's knitting needles clicked rapidly as Megan asked if she knew anything about cabin 743. Helen hesitated before lowering her voice. "There are stories," she said. "A man died in that room. Some say he jumped from the deck. Others say he never left at all." Megan pressed her for details, but Helen only shook her head. "The crew won't talk about it. Not officially. They scrub the passenger lists every year, but sometimes things slip through." She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "I kept this from a cruise years ago. Same ship. Look at the names." When Megan unfolded the paper, her stomach tightened. It was a photocopy of an old passenger list, dated exactly 3 years prior. Most of the names were blurred from the copy, but one stood out in sharp, bold print. Daniel Crow, cabin 743. In the column marked disembarked, his entry was blank. Megan ran her finger down the list twice, hoping she'd missed it, but there was no departure record. When she looked up, Helen's eyes were glassy. "He never checked out," Helen whispered. "And neither did the girl who had that room before you." That night, as the ship rocked gently on the dark water, an announcement blared over the intercom, the kind that instantly quieted every conversation on board. "Attention all passengers. If anyone has seen Ms. Laura Bennett, please contact guest services immediately." Murmurs swept through the hallways. Megan didn't know the name, but her chest tightened anyway. Later, she overheard 2 crew members whispering near the stairwell. "She was last seen near the aft deck," one said. "Security says the cameras glitched again." The other just muttered, "It's happening again." Before walking off quickly, in the early hours of the morning, Megan awoke to the sensation of the mattress shifting, as if someone had just sat down beside her. She kept her eyes closed, paralyzed, every muscle rigid. A moment later, a cold fingertip brushed her wrist, and a man's voice whispered near her ear, "You need to leave." By the next evening, Lena's fear had hardened into something sharper, determination. She couldn't spend another night jumping at shadows, waiting for the next note or flower. After her shift, she stopped at a local electronics shop and spent most of her savings on 2 small security cameras. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, gave her a knowing look when Lena mumbled something about weird neighbors. Installing the cameras gave Lena a fragile sense of control, though her hands trembled as she fastened one near her apartment door and another pointed toward the fire escape outside her bedroom window. She left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, streaming the feeds in real time. That night, Lena kept the apartment dark, choosing instead to sit silently in the living room with Marcy on speakerphone for company. Hours passed. The city outside grew quieter until even the hum of distant traffic faded. Around 1 a.m., the faint sound of metal scraping reached her ears, a careful, deliberate noise from the fire escape. She leaned toward her laptop, and her blood turned to ice. On the grainy feed, the hooded man was climbing, his movements slow and deliberate, his face occasionally illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. Her first instinct was to scream or call Marcy, but something in her froze. She watched as he crouched near her bedroom window, reaching into his pocket for something shiny, a small utility knife glinting in the dark. Then, just as he began to fiddle with the latch, the camera's tiny red light blinked. He paused, tilting his head toward it. For the first time, Lena saw his face clearly, a scruffy jawline, sunken eyes, and a faint scar running from his eyebrow to his temple. He wasn't some faceless nightmare anymore. He was real, human, and careless enough to show himself. Adrenaline surged. Lena grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering urgently to the dispatcher. The man, still crouched on the fire escape, seemed to realize his mistake. He scrambled backward, slipped slightly on the metal grating, and disappeared into the night. Lena stayed on the line with the dispatcher until the wail of distant sirens reached her ears. Two uniformed officers arrived, their flashlights sweeping the fire escape and surrounding alleyway, but the stalker was gone. One of them, a stocky man with a calm demeanor, assured her they'd increase patrols in the area. But Lena saw the doubt flicker in his eyes. After the officers left, Lena replayed the footage again and again, memorizing every detail of the man's face. For the first time, she felt a shift, not safety, but leverage. He had made a mistake, and now she had proof. Still, the realization that he'd been inches from stepping into her bedroom left her shaken. She pushed the couch back against the window, double-checked every lock, and slept with a kitchen knife beside her bed. Outside, the city seemed deceptively calm, but Lena knew the game had changed. The hunter had shown himself, and she wasn't the same frightened girl she'd been a week ago. The following day, Lena barely made it through her shift. Every hiss of the espresso machine sounded too loud. Every unfamiliar customer made her tense. But beneath the fatigue was a spark of resolve. That grainy security footage was a weapon, and she wasn't about to waste it. On her lunch break, she emailed the clip to the precinct, attaching a short message. "This is the man who tried to break in last night. Please tell me you can run his face." She didn't expect a quick reply, but within an hour, Officer Campbell, the stocky policeman from the night before, called. "We'll circulate this internally," he said. "But without a clear ID, it's tricky. You said he's been persistent." His tone was cautious, like he didn't want to scare her further. That evening, Marcy showed up with a determined expression and a large thermos of coffee. "If they won't catch him, we will," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Lena tried to laugh, but her hands were cold as she held the mug. Together, they devised a plan. They'd leave a window slightly ajar as bait and position the cameras for a better angle. Marcy even borrowed a neighbor's motion sensor light to install on the fire escape. "If he's coming back," Marcy whispered, "we'll get him on tape this time." The two women double-checked every detail. Their unease masked by forced bravado. Night fell heavy and still, the kind of quiet that made the world outside feel deserted. Lena dimmed the lights and waited on the living room floor, her laptop streaming both camera feeds. Marcy sat beside her, gripping a heavy flashlight like a club. Hours dragged by with nothing but the occasional groan of the building settling. But at 2:16 a.m., movement flickered on the fire escape camera, a shadow sliding into view. The hooded man climbed carefully, avoiding the motion light. He hesitated near the ajar window, then reached for it, just as planned. Lena's breath caught, but something was wrong. Instead of approaching head-on, the man pulled something from his pocket, a piece of cloth, and used it to wipe down the edges of the window frame. He knew about fingerprints. Then he crouched lower and angled himself out of the camera's line of sight, as if anticipating their setup. The motion light failed to trigger. Lena's heart pounded. He'd learned from his mistake. Marcy's hand tightened on her arm. "He's smarter than we thought," she whispered. And then, just as suddenly, the man retreated, vanishing into the darkness without even trying the window. The two women sat frozen, the apartment heavy with dread. The plan hadn't scared him off. It had only confirmed what he already knew, that Lena was watching for him now. When the police reviewed the footage the next day, they admitted it was frustratingly inconclusive. The stalker had revealed no more than he wanted. But Lena felt a subtle, sickening shift. This wasn't just a game of cat and mouse anymore. It was a chess match, and her opponent had just sacrificed a move to gain the upper hand. She began to wonder, what else did he already know about her? 2 days after the failed trap, Lena forced herself back to her routine. Avoiding her cafe shift wasn't an option. She needed the money, and hiding felt like handing the stalker victory. The morning rush offered a strange kind of comfort. The clatter of mugs, the hiss of steam wands, the constant hum of conversation. But by mid-afternoon, she noticed something unsettling. A man in a dark jacket sat at a corner table, facing the register. He never ordered anything beyond a black coffee and didn't touch his phone or a book. Each time she glanced his way, his eyes were already on her. At first, she told herself it could be coincidence. Plenty of customers wore dark jackets. But then, when she walked past his table to clear mugs, she saw a faint scar on his temple, the same scar she'd memorized from the security footage. Her breath caught mid-step, and for a moment, she nearly dropped the tray. He smiled slightly, a small, knowing curl of his lips that felt like a threat dressed as politeness. Panic surged, but she forced herself to walk calmly back behind the counter, every nerve screaming. Lena texted Marcy under the counter. "He's here. Scar on temple. Sitting near the window." Her coworker responded immediately. "Call the cops. Now." But when Lena dared another glance, the man was gone. His seat empty, coffee cup abandoned. She scanned the sidewalk outside, but the crowd swallowed him whole. The fact that he'd risked showing himself in public was chilling. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wanted her to know he could be anywhere, at any time that evening. She returned to her apartment to find yet another note taped to her door. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "You looked beautiful today." It wasn't just an observation. It was proof that he'd been close enough to watch her work, close enough to memorize her movements. She locked the door, turned on every light, and called Marcy, her voice cracking. "He's taunting me now," Lena whispered. "He wants me scared in the open." On the other end, Marcy's silence spoke volumes. Later that night, Lena sat on her couch staring at the footage she'd collected, piecing together every clue. The parking lot, the roses, the window. The man was growing bolder, escalating. The cafe had once been her safe place, a bubble of normalcy amid the chaos. Now, even that was contaminated. As the city outside buzzed with distant nightlife, Lena realized she wasn't just fighting fear anymore. She was fighting for her sense of reality. She swore under her breath that she wouldn't let him break her. But even as she tried to summon anger, a cold truth lingered. He was always one step ahead. 2 nights after seeing him at the cafe, Lena decided to spend a few hours at Marcy's place to avoid being alone. The laughter they forced over a silly movie was thin, but it helped. By the time Lena returned home just past midnight, the street outside her building was unnervingly quiet. She climbed the stairs slowly, her ears straining for any sound beyond her own footsteps. The hallway lights flickered as always, but something felt off. The air carried a faint, unfamiliar scent, like stale cologne and cigarette smoke, that didn't belong to her neighbors. She hesitated outside her apartment door, the key trembling in her hand. The lock turned too easily, as though it had already been used recently. The door creaked open to reveal darkness inside. She reached for the light switch and froze. A white rose lay in the center of her living room floor, perfectly placed, its petals untouched. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, the camera feed paused on a frozen frame. Her own bedroom, taken earlier in the evening. She hadn't left it that way. Heart racing, Lena backed toward the door, her phone clutched tight. Her mind screamed to run, to call the police, but fear anchored her in place. Then a faint noise came from the bedroom, a soft, deliberate shuffle, the sound of someone trying to move quietly. She didn't wait to confirm. Slamming the door shut behind her, she sprinted down the hallway, her socks sliding on the worn carpet. She nearly collided with Mr. Ortega, who had stepped out of his apartment after hearing the commotion. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed. Breathless, Lena managed. "He's inside. He was inside my apartment." Mr. Ortega's face paled, and without hesitation, he pulled her into his apartment and locked the door. While Lena called 911, Ortega retrieved an old baseball bat from his closet. They waited in the dark, listening for footsteps in the hall. Minutes felt like hours before the faint sound of a door closing echoed from the stairwell. Her door or the building's front entrance, she couldn't tell. When the police finally arrived, they found Lena's apartment empty, but confirmed signs of forced entry. The lock had been tampered with, and her security cameras had been unplugged. One officer, a tall woman with sharp eyes, warned her to stay somewhere else for the night. "He's escalating," she said grimly. As Lena left with a hastily packed overnight bag, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder. The building's dark windows felt alive, each one a potential hiding place. And somewhere, she knew, he was out there, smiling at how easily he had invaded her world. Lena spent the next day holed up at Marcy's apartment, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. The police had promised to increase patrols, but she'd seen how little comfort their words offered. Sleep was impossible. Every sound outside Marcy's window felt like a threat. By evening, she'd stopped trembling and started thinking. Fear had kept her reactive for too long. Now, anger sharpened her focus. "He's not just going to stop," she whispered to Marcy. "He's playing with me. The only way this ends is if I end it." Together, they crafted a dangerous plan. They would make it look like Lena had returned to her apartment alone for the night. Marcy would stay nearby with Mr. Ortega and call 911 if anything went wrong. Lena would leave the lights off but set up her cameras again, this time hidden better, with her phone streaming live to Marcy's laptop. A motion-activated alarm, borrowed from Ortega, would sit just inside the window. The bait would be simple but risky: Lena herself. She packed nothing but a kitchen knife and her phone, then took a deep breath and walked back into her dark apartment. The familiar smell of coffee and old wood felt alien now, like stepping into a stranger's home. She positioned herself in the living room, crouched low behind the couch with a view of the window and door. The clock ticked loudly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Her breath fogged slightly in the cool air. She hadn't realized she was holding it until she exhaled. Then, around 1:42 a.m., the faint scrape of metal on metal reached her ears, the fire escape again. Her pulse spiked. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, she watched the hooded figure appear, moving with practiced caution. He checked the window latch, then pulled something from his pocket, a small crowbar this time. As he pried, the motion alarm inside the window clicked softly but didn't go off yet. Lena's phone buzzed silently. Marcy texting. "We see him. Stay low." The stalker slipped the window open and stepped inside, his silhouette looming in the darkness. Lena's hands tightened on the knife, but she stayed still. He crept further in, heading toward her bedroom, giving her a chance to slip out the front door. Her escape was almost silent, but the floorboard by the entry betrayed her with a soft groan. The man froze, then spun toward her, realizing the trap too late. As Lena bolted into the hallway, Ortega stepped out of the shadows with the bat, swinging hard. The stalker dodged, but the commotion sent him scrambling down the stairs and out the front door, straight into the waiting arms of two patrol officers Marcy had alerted earlier. The cuffs clicked shut as he hissed something under his breath. "This isn't over." Lena stood trembling under the hallway's flickering light, knowing it was, at least, for tonight. 2 days after the failed trap, Lena forced herself back to her routine. Avoiding her cafe shift wasn't an option. She needed the money, and hiding felt like handing the stalker victory. The morning rush offered a strange kind of comfort: the clatter of mugs, the hiss of steam wands, the constant hum of conversation. But by mid-afternoon, she noticed something unsettling. A man in a dark jacket sat at a corner table, facing the register. He never ordered anything beyond a black coffee and didn't touch his phone or a book. Each time she glanced his way, his eyes were already on her. At first, she told herself it could be coincidence. Plenty of customers wore dark jackets. But then, when she walked past his table to clear mugs, she saw a faint scar on his temple, the same scar she'd memorized from the security footage. Her breath caught mid-step, and for a moment, she nearly dropped the tray. He smiled slightly, a small, knowing curl of his lips that felt like a threat dressed as politeness. Panic surged, but she forced herself to walk calmly back behind the counter, every nerve screaming. Lena texted Marcy under the counter. "He's here. Scar on temple. Sitting near the window." Her coworker responded immediately. "Call the cops. Now." But when Lena dared another glance, the man was gone. His seat empty, coffee cup abandoned. She scanned the sidewalk outside, but the crowd swallowed him whole. The fact that he'd risked showing himself in public was chilling. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wanted her to know he could be anywhere, at any time that evening. She returned to her apartment to find yet another note taped to her door. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "You looked beautiful today." It wasn't just an observation. It was proof that he'd been close enough to watch her work, close enough to memorize her movements. She locked the door, turned on every light, and called Marcy, her voice cracking. "He's taunting me now," Lena whispered. "He wants me scared in the open." On the other end, Marcy's silence spoke volumes. Later that night, Lena sat on her couch staring at the footage she'd collected, piecing together every clue. The parking lot, the roses, the window. The man was growing bolder, escalating. The cafe had once been her safe place, a bubble of normalcy amid the chaos. Now, even that was contaminated. As the city outside buzzed with distant nightlife, Lena realized she wasn't just fighting fear anymore. She was fighting for her sense of reality. She swore under her breath that she wouldn't let him break her. But even as she tried to summon anger, a cold truth lingered. He was always one step ahead.